It is the 26th day of June 2023. Hello and welcome to the News International Edition, where we are broadcasting to you live from our Vision Group headquarters here in Kampala, Uganda. I'm Emma Akwero. We start off today from Sudan, where as fighting rages on, hundreds of Sudanese have arrived in Chad, while more than 155,000 have fled Darfur, heading to Chad since mid-April. According to the International Organization for Migration, artillery fire, airstrikes and gun battles rocked Sudan's capital on Saturday, witnesses told reporters, as the UN urges a stop to wanton killings that have left decomposing bodies in Darfur. While fighting rages, relief efforts have stalled after more than 2 months of fighting between two rival generals. Houses in Khartoum shook from the fighting that continued unabated, a resident said, with entire families sheltering in place, running low on vital supplies and running water in the baking summer heat. The United Nations says nearly 1.5 million people have fled the capital since violence erupted in mid-April, pitting a regular army against the paramilitary rapid support forces. The battle for power between Army Chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan and his former deputy RSF Commander Mohammed Hamdan Daglo has killed more than 2,000 people, according to the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project. The deadliest violence has raged in Darfur, a vast western region on the border with Chad, where the UN has warned of possible crimes against humanity and said the conflict has taken an ethnic dimension. The UN on Saturday urged immediate action to stop killings of people fleeing El Geneina, the West Darfur state capital, by Arab militias aided by the paramilitaries, saying a record 25 million people, more than half of Sudan's population, are in need of aid and protection. Two-thirds of health facilities in the main battlegrounds remain out of service, according to the Sudanese Doctors Union. The few hospitals still operating are extremely low on medical supplies and struggling to obtain fuel to power generators. No side appears to be willing to step down, exacerbating the risk of prolonged conflict with regional ramifications. Now, elsewhere in Sudan, other Sudanese have gathered at the Wade Hamed livestock market in Matama Governorate in the River State, some 152 kilometers north of Khartoum, a few days ahead of Eid Adha, as many complain that purchasing powers have declined due to the ongoing fighting. Sudan, which is considered one of the central countries of animal husbandry in Africa, has more than 100 million livestock. It exports animals to many countries, especially Saudi Arabia. Elsewhere, hundreds of thousands of Muslim pilgrims walked or rode buses on Monday to a giant tented city near Mecca for the climax of the animal Hajj that Saudi officials say could break attendance records.
Animal markets in Sudan's capital Khartoum are teeming with livestock just days before Muslims mark Eid Adha, or the Feast of Sacrifice. But the celebration comes at a time many in the country are struggling to make ends meet, and there are not many buyers. Most of the buyers come from Khartoum. The war has affected them and they have not yet received their salaries, yet there is no way to receive them soon. The situation is difficult and the purchasing power is a bit weak. Livestock is available in the market, but there is no money, no sales. All this is because of the war. People have not had income for a while. A rapid acceleration in prices since February means many families are priced out of buying sheep. Sudan's economy has been characterized by high inflation and currency shortages for years. Sacrifice is a part of this faith and the believers are willing to fulfill it, but with the war, it is close to impossible. We hope everything goes well after Eid, but now we are suffering from a severe recession. People aren't able to buy sacrificial animals as most of them are employees and they are going through harsh circumstances. May God look upon us with kindness.
وترى صابرين لله كل الجميع، يعني إن شاء الله ربنا ينظر بعين الرحمة.
Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of Muslim pilgrims walked or rode buses to a giant tented city near Mecca for the climax of the annual Hajj that Saudi officials say could break attendance records. Pilgrims in robes and sandals, many carrying umbrellas against the beating sun, undertook the journey to Mina on foot in the scorching heat or crowded onto hundreds of air-conditioned buses provided by Saudi authorities. Saudi officials say this year's Hajj, one of the 5 pillars of Islam, could be the biggest in history. After 2.5 million attended in 2019, numbers were capped in 2020, 21 and 22 because of the COVID pandemic. The event has seen multiple crises over the years, including militant attacks, deadly fires, and a 2015 stampede that killed up to 2,300 people. There have been no major incidents since.
Now, images released by the Russian Defense Ministry on June 26 show Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu inspecting Russian troops in his first public appearance since the failed mutiny by Wagner forces. Shoigu, the target of fierce criticism by the mercenary group's chief Yevgeny Prigozhin, went to a command post for Russian forces in Ukraine and held a meeting there with the leader of one of the units, according to images shown by the broadcaster.
Prigozhin was last seen late Saturday in an SUV leaving Rostov-on-Don, where his fighters had seized a military headquarters, to the cheers of some local people. Wagner mercenaries headed back to their base on Sunday after Russian President Vladimir Putin agreed to allow Prigozhin to avoid treason charges and accept exile in neighboring Belarus. The agreement ended an extraordinary crisis after the private army led by Putin's former close ally tried to storm Moscow. Prigozhin has repeatedly blamed Shoigu and Valery Gerasimov, chief of the general staff, for his fighters' deaths.
In context, 16 months ago, Russian forces were on the doorstep of Kyiv in Ukraine, thinking they'd take the city in a matter of days, thinking they would erase Ukraine from the map as an independent country. Now, over this weekend, they've had to defend Moscow, Russia's capital, against mercenaries of Putin's own making. Prigozhin himself, in this entire incident, has raised profound questions about the very premises for Russia's aggression against Ukraine in the first place, saying that Ukraine or NATO did not pose a threat to Russia, which is part of Putin's narrative, right, and it was a direct challenge to Putin's authority. So this raises profound questions. It shows real cracks.
Following the crisis, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Wagner's short-lived uprising in Moscow marked a direct challenge to Putin's authority and shows real cracks in Russian state authority during an interview.
I instructed my own team at the president's behest to engage with the Russians, first and foremost, to make sure that they understood their responsibilities in terms of protecting our own personnel, ensuring their safety and well-being, as well as any American citizens in Russia. So a number of people have engaged to make sure that the Russians got that message.
Meanwhile, Beijing has pledged its support for Russia's efforts in maintaining national stability in the wake of the short-lived armed uprising led by the head of the Wagner mercenary group, Yevgeny Prigozhin. The incident you mentioned involving the Wagner group is Russia's internal affairs. As a friendly neighbor and a comprehensive strategic partner in the new era, China supports and believes that Russia can maintain national stability and achieve development and prosperity. China and Russia maintain close, good communication at all levels.
Still from Russia, in 16 months since Russia launched its invasion on Ukraine, the closest that residents of Moscow had been to danger were a series of drone strikes that resulted in superficial damage to buildings. On June 24th, as Wagner Group mercenaries made their way down to the M4 motorways towards the capital, it seemed evident that this situation was about to change. However, whilst the world watched, anticipating a military standoff at the edge of Moscow that could potentially result in a coup, millions of Muscovites continued with their lives. A few hours later, Prigozhin announced that he was calling it off and would be returning to the front with his troops that had, in his words, halted within 200 kilometers of Moscow. Moscow's troops stood down and barriers blocking entry to the city were opened up. On the Red Square in central Moscow, people reacted to the aborted revolt of the Wagner mercenary group led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, which had threatened a day earlier to storm Moscow in a direct challenge to Russian President Vladimir Putin's rule. Now, a Japanese man hopes to make use of himself by joining the Ukrainian army to fight the Russian army. We'll return with this and more stories after this short break. Please stay with us.
Urban